Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to this morning's webinar on LGBTIQ homelessness. I can see the attendees list is beginning to fill up. I think we had about 110 people registered for the webinar, so we've got 50 people joining at the moment. So for those of you who are new to Zoom, although I think most of us, for better or worse, are intimately acquainted with Zoom, you can ask questions throughout the webinar in either the chat function or in the questions and answers function. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions as we go. There'll be a presentation from Mike Allen from Focus Ireland first, which is going to talk us through some of the recent research that they've had on how young LGBTIQ people are navigating homeless services in Ireland. And then afterwards, we'll have a presentation from Claire Hart from REFUGE in France that will talk about how do you deliver services specifically to the needs of the LGBTIQ community within homeless services. And so I'll be keeping an eye on the questions box. I'll be putting them to the speakers, but I'll try and keep questions for the very end so we can have a bit more of a conversation and a flow. But if you have specific comments on either presentation, let me know. Today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available afterwards online, and the presentations of the speakers will also be made available afterwards. So don't feel you have to write absolutely everything down. We'll make all the materials available afterwards. So just to begin, I'm going to share my screen. You should all be able to see my presentation at the moment. Quick reminder that this is just one webinar in our overall conference week. It's actually our second webinar, so we have, I think, 12 or 13 left over the course of the week. Please go over to our website if you'd like to find out more about the different webinars and topics that are being covered. It spans pretty much all the interest of the FEANTSA network. As I said, we have Mike Allen from Focus Ireland with us today and Claire Hart from REFUGE. I'll allow the two of them to introduce themselves at the start of their presentations as well. We would like to use this opportunity to plug FEANTSA membership. Some of you have probably been involved with FEANTSA over the last number of years, but in the last 12 months, we've changed our membership structures. And so at the moment, you can join FEANTSA if you are operating as a homeless service at a local level, if you're a city, an agency, a ministry, foundation, think tank, research institute, social housing provider, and a public health actor. And this is part of FEANTSA's broader aims to build a coalition to prevent and end homelessness. We cannot do it purely as homeless service providers. We need a broader coalition. There are many benefits to joining our network and our membership. You can see them there. It's about feeding into our policies, learning about best practices, working within our working groups and within our clusters, but also access to EU policymakers, getting support to access EU funding. But I think at the moment, there probably has never been a better time to join an organization like FEANTSA. Next year, the European Commission is going to launch a platform on homelessness where they will establish a goal to end homelessness in Europe. There'll be a monitoring system, a progress system in place to try and reach that goal by 2030. And there'll be a whole host of new support, strategies, capacity building, funding made available by the Commission. And so FEANTSA can be a very important network to navigate and to help gain access to all those resources which will become available in the months and in the years ahead. You can find all information on joining the FEANTSA network online, and we'll also have some follow-up information after the webinar on that. So I'm going to hand over to Mike Allen from Focus Ireland now to share his screen to bring up his presentation. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat box. Mike.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm Mike Allen. I'm the Director of Advocacy in Focus Ireland, which is one of the leading housing and homeless organisations in Ireland. I just want to share with you that just before we came on, the whole town where I live is undergoing a computer go off and everything. So I'm able to join you here on a connection from my phone and on my laptop. So it's a slightly, I had a slightly more elaborate presentation to give to you, but I'll send that on to Robbie and you can put it online afterwards. So hope we can do justice to the research that Focus Ireland did on this issue in a way which is helpful for the seminar. So Focus Ireland is an organisation that provides services, supports to homeless people, mostly prevention and exits from homeless, and very active for many years in FEANTSA at European level. But we also have a fairly substantial commitment to research, to evidence-based advocacy, public policy advocacy on homelessness. And that's been a huge part of what we've looked at over the last number of years. And a large part of that has been looking at youth homelessness. So Focus Ireland, going right back, would have commissioned some of the first research in Ireland about care leavers' experience of homelessness, and work by international experts like Paula Mayock on longitudinal studies of young people experiencing homelessness. And we were looking at this a couple of years ago in the context of where we go next and what a strategy would look like. And we were talking to our colleagues in Canada, Steve Gates and Melanie Redmond, that many of you would know. And in their presentation suddenly came up this line which said, if you're not looking at LGBTQ plus homelessness, you don't understand youth homelessness at all. And there was sort of a lot of looking around in the room, and when we got to the questions and answers, somebody asked from the seminar, said, well, what do we know about that in Ireland? And the answer is absolutely nothing at all. So after all the work that we had done, we realized that there was this gap, at least in the evidence base, and at I feel like the level at which I was working and people in the advocacy base were working on these issues. So what we did then is we started to ask around to see what was known or what was thought about this issue, and we came up with two paradoxes which I think are worth sharing in terms of this whole area. One is perhaps uniquely Irish, but I'm sure it's got resonances elsewhere in different ways, is that the whole view in Ireland, and many of you who are either Irish or aware of what's happened in Ireland over the last number of years, would see that Ireland would know that Ireland considers itself to be well in the advance in dealing with LGBTQI issues. And we're the first country through a referendum to legalise same-sex marriage. We've got equality legislation. We've got a whole range of things. We have appalling history, like many other countries in the past, of treating and criminalising different forms of gender and sexual expression. But in recent years, we're quite proud of ourselves. And yet, there's very little research or evidence or whatever about LGBTQI people in the margins, and our concentration has been on the mainstream, and very little in terms of what is still happening to people in the margins. And the other paradox is that policymakers, managers of homeless services, people like me, are fairly blind to this issue. They say that homeless services are open to all, we don't judge people, we're very progressive, we don't consider this a problem. And that's true of straight people in that level and of gay people as well. At that level, there's just a blindness to the issue. But every LGBTQ, as whatever people of different gender perspectives and identities who actually work in frontline services, every one of them says it's a huge issue and a major unaddressed issue. And we immediately came across people in our own organisation who've been saying for years that we've been ignoring this. And you simply just have to acknowledge that we had been deaf to the points that they had making up until that point. So our job then was to, the whole point of research is, of course, you research things you know and you think you understand to validate what you believe. But sometimes you research things because you don't understand them, because you need to understand them. You need to bring them out into the open on an evidence-based way. And when we do this sort of intersectional work in Focus Ireland, which we do a fair amount, we're currently also working on a big piece of research on domestic violence, for instance, we always link in with an organisation that knows the area well. In this case, we were very lucky to link up with an organisation called Belong To, which is a youth organisation specialising in LGBTQ young people. All their experiences, by no means only homelessness, that's one of their issues. And they were our partner right the way through this, which was extremely positive. Then you need funds for the research, and it's worth mentioning that we found it difficult to get that funding. eventually we simply had to go to our own resources and for our own fundraising and fundraising which was for general purposes of, for the organisation, and do it out of that. And once we got that, we managed to get support from other organisations, Stephen Stream Trust and others. Commissioned the research independently, and we got the research. There should be a slide specifically about the researchers, but it's one of the ones that got lost due to the power cut. And we were delighted when we got a tender from Professor Michelle Norris from UCD, who's one of the leading experts on public housing and homelessness in Ireland, and from Aidan Quigley, who is one of the leading experts on gender studies in Ireland, both working in UCD. I'd never worked together before and came together to work with us on this. We did 22 interviews with LGBT youth, young people who were homeless in various different respects. It's worth noting there, and I'll come back to it, I think, in the findings, that a lot of them were not in homeless services. A lot of them were homeless under the ethos typology, but for a variety of reasons were not going into homeless services as we'd formerly know them. We also spoke to 14 stakeholders, managers, frontline staff, policymakers, and so on. And an interesting point, I think, in the research is worth making is that what we've done for the last number of years is have a round table before the research is finished. And in the past, we would have finished our research, got our recommendations together and published, and therefore managed to catch a lot of people off guard and sometimes not get the most positive response to our recommendations that you would want. But by having a pre-publication roundtable where the emerging conclusions and recommendations are discussed, we hope to have a more positive response for people, give them a chance to think about what's coming over the horizon. So quickly then, what the findings are from the research. The process of coming out continues to present enormous challenges to young people, even in the Ireland where we think is so liberal and inclusive. Homophobia, transphobia persist and are very strong in various different levels within society. But specifically on the process of becoming homeless, the tensions with parents can result in the young person who's coming out leaving their home without a secure home. And that goes from there's a spectrum there, if you like, from the extreme cases where a parent would say, you can't live here now that you have revealed yourself to be an LGBT person of this different form of sexual identity, gender identity, where people are actually thrown out of home, if you want to use that phrase, to cases where the parents are quite accepting, but by living in the home, it constrains the lifestyle or choices, the way that people want to express their sexuality, or the town that they're living, the place that they're living, presents that sort of constraint. So the process of distancing from homeless was a very strong part of this. So you had what Michelle Norris has subsequently called double invisibility, that it was that people who are LGBT plus and homeless and haven't yet, or in the process of coming out, haven't yet identified as LGBT, and very often they also do not identify as homeless. So this is a number of things. It's a finding, and it's extremely important. It's also part of the research process. It was why it was so hard to find people to interview as part of this, that people were hiding in two different ways or remaining invisible in two different ways, didn't want to come out and talk about one of their issues, whether it be homelessness or the LGBT issues, and they had extremely negative perceptions of homelessness and didn't want to identify as homeless. But it also has really huge implications in terms of services, that you are people who are doubly hard to reach, if you use that sort of language, that they don't want to come into homeless services, and they are also maybe not fully engaging with LGBT sort of issues as well, and yet they're in marginalized and difficult circumstances. So that's the issues that emerged about becoming homeless. So you had a large number of people who were sofa surfing or living in very precarious situations, but not coming into homeless services. When they become homeless or are actually homeless, a number of the homeless, the people interviewed, saw homeless services as a site of homophobia or transphobia. I think that's a very difficult finding for a lot of organizations who don't see themselves that way and do consider themselves to be open and liberal. And I do think part of the process of this of research is to discover people think about you, things you don't think about yourself. And that puts upon you a very strong obligation to think through why that impression is there, not simply dismiss it as wrong, but to find out why it's there and what you can do to overcome it. There was, as probably you might expect, but it's really important to see it evidenced, this really concerning relation between homelessness, these gender issues, and mental health. And again, you have these two very problematic, very traumatic experiences for people, homelessness, experience of homelessness, and moving out of their own home, coming along with the issues that would arise from coming out and experiencing homophobia or transphobia, and the effects on mental health. And that was very strong. And again, we identified the weakness of mental health services for young people in Ireland, particularly if they're marginalised in different ways. There were some very positive stories about frontline workers and organisations and the way that they responded to people in difficult circumstances. That came through, but it wasn't systemic, it was individuals. And I think that's a real important lesson, that we need to make sure that this isn't one or two people who understand this and are able to respond to it, but is actually systemic. And then, as the last thing, is this need for safe spaces within services. I mean, that can just say, I mean, the thing that people, I think, the immediate reaction to this was sort of like, we need night shelters for people who are LGBTQ. That isn't one of the recommendations here. The recommendation is we look at that in more detail as to what the implications of that is, because the experience of being homeless isn't just about the night shelters, but every engagement you have with services and day services, advice and information, all the places where you might seek help. And so that's where the priority is in terms of the recommendations, is to try and identify what safe spaces would look like, what would be the standards we need to apply, and to work with our colleagues right across the sector to deal with this. One of the important elements of the recommendations of thinking about this is that we shouldn't just do this as an organisation, Focus Ireland. It needs to be something that's right across the services, and the umbrella organisation for this in Dublin is the Dublin Homeless Network. And with FEANTSA, we're going to now be working collectively to try and work out what the safe spaces would look like, what the training would look like, what networks of LGBTQ frontline staff would look like, and things like that. We don't want to do something where it's just we issue a sort of a sticker which people can put in their windows saying they're a safe space. It genuinely needs to be something that's thought through, and when people enter into it, their experience is of being in a safe place, and their sensitivities and their rights, the issues they're facing, are properly understood and responded to in a sensitive way. One of the things that really came across strongly in the research is the young people not wanting to have to explain to frontline workers the basics of gender identity and who they are and how they want to be addressed. They want that to be understood, so they don't have to go through that. And I think that also is I think, an extremely important finding, and links into our experience with homelessness in general. That the experience of homeless people in general is that they constantly have to explain themselves, tell their story innumerable times, tell their story again, explain how they got there, explain everything about them. The experience of LGBTQI plus people is that, plus having to explain all the rest of their identity and the issues around them. And I think that highlights what is really important piece in this work is being homeless is wrong, being homeless is miserable and destructive. Being young and homeless is particularly miserable, particularly destructive. And some of the experiences that the young LGBTQI homeless people had were simply the experiences of young homeless people, appalling experiences all young homeless people have. Then there was a set of experiences which are unique to them because of their gender identity, the phase in their development and so on that they were currently going through at the time. And to be able to distinguish the things we need to change for everyone and the things we need to change in response to the particular needs of some people is quite an important issue. And it's important that the particular needs of LGBTQI young people are not simply dismissed as the needs that all young people have, because those in themselves are pretty compelling. So recommendations, one of the important things we did with the recommendations is there is in Ireland an LGBT plus youth strategy. So we link back very much the recommendations here to the existing youth strategy on LGBT youth. And we also contextualize it in that we're, our current government, our incoming government that's just came to power in the last few months, has a commitment to having a youth homelessness strategy. So we're now able to say that that youth homelessness strategy has to very strongly reflect the fact that a significant proportion of youth homelessness is around these gender identity and sexuality issues for the young people who are experiencing them. So there's a whole range of implications for services. We very much are pointing the finger back at ourselves and our organisations for what we do, as well as implications for policy. So that's not quite the presentation. I hope to show you some nice pictures and some things like that, but due to the power cut, I wasn't able to, so I hope that gave a sense of the research, which is up on our website. And again, I'll give the link to the full report and to the executive summary to Robbie so he can circulate that. So thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Mike. And we'll make sure to share a copy of the report as well with participants as part of the follow-up. So if anybody has any questions, comments, again, you can put them into the chat box and the general or the question and answers box, but there's nothing at the moment, so I'm going to proceed and let Claire do her presentation, but I have this, so I'm going to share it on my screen, and Claire, you can direct me as you wish for how you want to proceed. Okay. So just one moment. Okay. Perfect. Claire, can you just unmute you?
Hello, Robbie. Can you hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Okay. Hi to all. I'm really happy to be with you. And sorry, it's a bit sunny here. I hope I don't make those of you in a grayer, kind of damper climates feel too bad. But I'm soaking it up for all of you. I'm really happy to be here with Robbie and Mike and all of those watching in. And I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about our work at REFUGE in France and abroad as well, because we're working more and more internationally today. It's actually perfect, and Robbie always gets it right. It's perfect. Following on from what Mike just said, we're absolutely in line with what has just been said. And I'd like to actually start with the comment that was made by Mike. If you are not looking at LGBTIQ homelessness, you won't understand youth homelessness. I so agree with that. And that is what we've been doing at REFUGE over the last 17 years. First thing to be said is that we are a purely LGBTIQ homeless service. So that's what we do. That's what we've been doing for the last 17 years. And we were founded in the first place by Nicolas Noguier, who is our president and who experienced the situation himself. So he realized 17 years ago that we needed this kind of homeless service specifically dedicated to questions of gender identity and more widely to the LGBTIQ community. So we were created 7 years ago, and our goal is to provide accommodation and support for the young LGBTIQ community as a whole. That's what we do. Just in introduction to that, obviously the reasons are exactly what was found in Mike's survey. The notion that the coming out process is a very challenging time and can obviously create friction in the household. Tensions with parents can lead to a young person leaving the family home, finding themselves out in the street, either because they've chosen to leave or because they've been thrown out, and I'll talk about that just afterwards, and obviously without any kind of suitable solution, which leads to sofa surfing and great precarity as they find themselves outside. There is, of course, a reluctance to use homeless services, as Mike underline. That is very clear. And we know that it's got a lot to do with the fact that young people feel that nobody's going to understand their specific issue and the gender issues that they're facing. And we know as well that this can lead to very, very serious problems of addiction, of prostitution, of self-mutilation, of street abuse. And we all know, and this is a terrifying figure, that in all of our countries, suicide levels are very, very high, much higher than the average for the LGBTIQ community. In France, we say more or less 5 times higher than outside of that community. So it is a very real issue. And thank you, Mike, for underlining that, because it's something that we're all up against. So, as I said, we were created 17 years ago in the light of all of this, to deal with all of this. And I'd just like to, and we can move into the next slide, Robbie, I'd just like to tell you really what we're all about. So why does the refuge exist, and who are we? So we are today recognized by the French state as being a public utility, meaning that we are of public use. We provide emergency accommodation and support for our young LGBTIQ guests, as we like to call them. And we work together to combat isolation and suicide in this specific community due to homophobia, transphobia, and family breakdown as a whole. So we are really there to accompany the youth in their physical, mental, and sexual health, and, you know, help them to rebuild, and accompanying them through this difficult phase. We also have really worked, and I'll talk about advocacy just after, but we worked very hard to develop our name, if you like, in France particularly, because we believe that the more we're seen, the more we're heard, the more we're out there, if you like, the more young people will recognize us and come to us when they're in need and when they're in difficulty. So we work quite a lot with the community of actors, singers, the media community as a whole. And we have a wonderful fairy godmother, we like to call her, who is Muriel Robin, who is a French comedian, and she supports us, and that has been very, very useful to us. Moving into the next slide, Robbie, please. This is a slide which is actually quite terrifying. I mean, I'm going to let you maybe look at that testimonial. This is a young guy called Romain who came to us at age 18 and who actually left his home under the threat of a shotgun. His father actually pulled out a shotgun and threatened him, saying basically, get out, I don't, no faggots in my home, so you get out of here. Now, this is the kind of thing that we're up against all the time. A lot of violence, a lot of deeply entrenched homophobia. We had a very, very big influx of young people when France was fighting at the time legislatively for same-sex marriage. That, you know, kind of unleashed a lot of horrors in young people's homes, and we had a lot of people coming to us at that time. So the quote here by Romain is very real, is very much what we're facing, and I have to say we are continually flabbergasted by what we're hearing. Unfortunately, and very sadly, that's what we're up against. Now, moving into the next slide, we act in 3 different areas. So 3 specific areas of great importance, and the 3 areas are all interconnected. The first is obviously accommodation and support. Accommodation to the young people when they come to us, and mental, physical, and sexual and general health support. Now, the young people can come from many different areas. They can be sent to us by doctors, by health professionals. They can call us directly. We have a 24/7 emergency line, which is really fundamental to everything we do, meaning if a young person is out in the street, they can call us at any time and we will go and collect them, go and pick them up and look after them immediately, give them a roof over their heads, food in their plate, and the support that they require. Then, of course, and this was mentioned as well by Mike, advocacy, lobbying, if you like, that is very, very important for us, raising awareness. And we work particularly in schools on a very, very regular basis. And we feel that is extremely important. We're able to get a lot of messages across to young people in schools from 15 to 18 years old is particularly what we're looking at. And then advocacy at a more political level as well, both in France, but also in Europe. We've been invited onto some homeless boards where we talk specifically about LGBTIQ homelessness. So advocacy too is very much part and parcel of what we do. Just to come back to the accommodation area, when we take young people in, and today we take young people from the age of 15 to the age of 25, when we take those young people in, we are taking them in for as long as we need to. Obviously, our goal is to have them back out into society as quickly as possible because, you know, that's where they need to be, living a happy, healthy, balanced life. But if they need a year with us, a year and a half, we will have them with us for that amount of time. So it's only when they're ready to leave that they will leave at the end. So that is very important. We need to highlight the fact that it can be between 6 months and a couple of years. And within that time, we are helping them to move on. And obviously for the older members of, for our older guests, we are also working on the after, you know, how to get them back into work. If they need training, we will train them. And we have a lot of partners and support organs that are working with us to really help them get into companies afterwards and join businesses and really, you know, become fully contributing members of society. So that's our goal. Now, next slide, Robbie, please. We're going to take a look at how we have spread in France. As I say at the beginning, we were just a local association, a charity that was set up in Montpellier in the south of France, which is where I am today, sunny south. And we've spread in the last 17 years across France into the French overseas territories as well. And we have today 20 structures. We also have, and this is very important because this is becoming a large part of what we do, we have a national experimentation center for LGBTIQ refugees, which is in Angers, which is in the center north of France. That is very important because, as I say, we're getting more and more requests from refugees. We have refugees that contact us from abroad directly. We have refugees that make it to France and then contact us. And we also have French embassies which actually receive people that ask for asylum on the basis of the risks that they face in their own country of homophobia, transphobia, and violence surrounding all of these areas. So today, I would say half of our guests, more or less, are asylum seekers. And we accompany those asylum seekers really from A to Z, and we take them right the way through the asylum process until they receive their status, their asylum seeker status, and can stay in France, can work in France, and become fully fledged members of the French community. And this summer, we've had about 15 of the young people that we follow who have received their papers, which is for us a very major event and a wonderful way forward, obviously, for the young people that we follow. Second important moment for us is our center, our facility for under 18s. So for under 18s, because we realized 2 or 3 years ago that we would have to try to work to create a specific center. We were getting more and more requests from under 18s, and we couldn't take them on board because, you cannot mix under 18s with over 18s, obviously. So we fought to create a specific, very family-oriented centre, and we managed to get this off the ground about 6 months ago. And we have this fantastic family home in Aujargues with 7 young under 18s in it, young people who were in the street, under 18. You can imagine just the horrors of that. And so we managed to give them this special site, special centre, where we look after them, really look after them, and make sure they get proper schooling, proper tuition, and really homely family environment. So that's a great pride for us, and we'll certainly be opening up more of those in the future, because we have more requests than numbers of beds in this specific centre. In order to spread our work across the whole of French territory, we have 40 local correspondents. So they are located all over the place. You can see them on the map, and they will be our correspondents. When we get a call on our emergency line, we connect it directly to those local correspondents who will help to find solutions for the young people that call us. Today, we have an enormous support network of over 16,000 people. These are the people that really, support us financially, because we are principally financially supported by the private sector, but also give us time, energy, organize fundraising events. We wouldn't be here today without our 16,000 members. We have over 450 volunteers as well, who are absolutely essential to what we do. That means that in our 20 centres, we have several employees. We've got 21 employees as a whole, but we have principally volunteer workers who are trained by the Refuge and who give their time completely free of charge to us, and accompany our young people, take them out on visits, help them to get their CV ready, and just, are a listening ear for these young people. Now, I just want to come back to what Mike was saying at this point. I think what is very, very important is that when young LGBTIQ youth come to us, it's exactly what Mike was saying. They know that when they come to us, everybody understands the gender issues that they're facing. They are going to tell their story, of course, because they have to, but they're not going to have to go into the nitty-gritty of gender identity and gender issues, because everybody is trained and everybody knows where they're coming from. So that is very important, and I really back Mike up on that point. I think that's one of the things that we must never forget, is to what extent our young people need to know that they are understood. They're understood in their gender issues. Very, very important. So to come back to our team of salaried workers, we have 22 today employees. This includes principally social workers and, of course, heads of service. We've got a director who's amazing, Frederic Gall, and accountants and admin and communication and everything that you have to have in a large NGO. So there we go. That's pretty much the way that we're organized throughout France. As I say, we're also organized in French overseas territories, Guyana, the Reunion Islands, Guadeloupe as well. These are French overseas islands particularly. And very important to be in those overseas territories, because the problems of homophobia, transphobia, gender issues as a whole are extremely rife in those specific areas. So we need to be there. We need to be as close as possible to the population and to the young LGBTIQ population who are suffering greatly. And we decided to actually set up over there. We've also set up emergency lines in Guadeloupe and elsewhere, in order as well to be able to take all of the calls on board in those specific territories. So I think that pretty much covers what we do. Just a quick resume at the end, Robbie, if we can move on. A few facts and figures, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Since 2003, we have supported 8,503, to be precise, young LGBTIQ persons. We've hosted over 2,000 young people because we have two different support mechanisms. We have accommodated young people, but we also can support young people at a distance. So we have young people that actually live in their own accommodation, but are supported and accompanied by ourselves. 2019, we had practically 7,000 calls on the emergency line. Just one point I'd like to make on that. We receive calls from young people, but not only, we also receive calls from their families. And one of the things that we will always try and do is to get families and young people back together. If the young people come to us, if their families are willing to come back into contact with them, and if the young person wants that, we will mediate between the young person and the family. And that's very important. We have some happy end stories where people come back together, the young person can reintegrate the family home, and that's obviously a fabulous, fabulous thing. So 40,000 overnight stays were spent with us, and we had 480 people who helped 306 persons. 20% of all of our young people are trans. That's another important point. And we have also had to train our teams to be more knowledgeable about the question of trans identity, and particularly about transphobia and what these young people are up against. And as I said, we're very, very concerned about advocacy, and we have accompanied over practically 6,000 school kids in our school actions. So 6,000 school kids is fabulous, but we've got a long way to go on that. We'd dream of being able to speak to every kid at least one point in France in their school years. So that's very, very important. We think that those school sessions are essential to making France a more inclusive place in the future. So that's it for me. Obviously, I'd love to answer any questions, and we'd be extremely happy, obviously, to talk to you later on down the line. If anybody's thinking of setting up a specifically dedicated LGBTIQ youth service, youth homelessness service, we'll be there to help and support right the way down the line. Thanks very much for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. So I think maybe just to get into the questions right away, and a reminder to all the attendees, you can ask a question either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I think the first question, I'd have myself, perhaps for both of you, is I think the elephant in the room at the moment is COVID-19, and I think particularly, Mike, at the start of your presentation, you mentioned the research there around family conflict being a trigger to LGBTIQ homelessness. Is that something that came up in the research at all around, did the research ever overlap with the COVID-19 lockdowns, and was there anything said about that having a higher impact on LGBTIQ young people? And Claire, for you, within a refuge, when lockdowns started happening in different parts of France, did you see an impact on LGBTIQ young people who are perhaps staying at home in families where they couldn't leave, that were quite homophobic or transphobic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shall I answer, or Mike, would you like to go?
You go, Claire.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, absolutely, Robbie. You're quite right. It's been a major issue for us from 2 points of view. First, because yes, we did have an influx in numbers of calls, in numbers of issues, in numbers of kids being thrown out. We had to be very, very quick to react in many parts of France, because kids were finding themselves out in the street or having to leave because the situation became completely unbearable. The same kind of thing as with domestic violence. Everything was exacerbated, I think, during the lockdown period. So yes, indeed, we did have to really pull out all the stops and find solutions. And we were very lucky because we had a lot of support from we had a hotel chain supporting us, providing hotel rooms. So we were able to get those young people out quite quickly and into hotel accommodation, just to get them away from their family before something more dramatic occurred. So yes, absolutely, very, very immediate effect. And the second area that impacted us was that obviously we have permanent contact with our young people, be it the people that are accommodated or those that we follow outside of the refuge, and suddenly we couldn't actually see them anymore. So we very, very quickly had to set up a kind of distance system whereby all of our volunteers, our almost 500 volunteers, all had an allotted number of young people that they would call every single day. We all were calling. I had 6 or 7 young people to call every day. So we would just give them a quick call, send a text message, just to make sure that everybody was okay, because it was very, very difficult for some of the young people to deal with the isolation, with the social distancing. We also had to deal with more material aspects like food. So we were delivering, we had a kind of little delivery service, and we were driving around delivering food parcels to different places, different houses, and the different places that our young people actually live in. So yeah, it was a very busy period, very intense period, but it also showed us, as with a lot of us, that, you know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and we managed to pull out all the stops and keep things going, and really it was, I think, quite successful.
Thanks. And the short answer really from the research, Robbie, is the field research with the young people was completed really before the COVID-19 came along. So it didn't feature in the research. And we don't really, I mean, in Ireland, during the lockdown period, we had the eviction bans and so on. The number of people becoming homeless fell very dramatically, but mostly family. What we were seeing was a big fall in family homelessness. There is a phenomenon of increase, even though family homelessness now is falling, single people's homelessness is rising, and we don't know what's behind that. And you can, but we do know more staying with friends' houses and so on. The lockdown period was extremely difficult for them and for their hosts. And you either had to stay where you were, or you had to, or you were out on the streets essentially, because you couldn't move from household to household as the way you'd been doing so before. And since we know that it's predominantly we know that it must have fallen more heavily on them, but it isn't something that we have any specific evidence on above and beyond the sort of what we generally know about homelessness during that period anyway. And the same sort of thing that Claire was describing would be what homeless services here were doing, was really regular.
Yeah. From my side, Mike, you've broken up a small little bit.
Yeah, me too.
But I think we got most of the answer. The audio is kind of okay, but your screen has frozen. I have another question to ask about the experience of setting up LGBTIQ services. I suppose maybe from Claire's side, have you ever had negative experiences of going in and working on this topic? And I guess, Mike, from your side, I know the research is quite new, but have you had pushback from organizations that don't want to work on it? Have you found negative experiences?
Really, I think probably what I would answer to that, Robbie, is we've been in this for 17 years, so it goes back a long way. I would say probably at the beginning, it was, you had to be a pioneer and you had to really get it off the ground, and it was pretty new, quite original, that took a lot of convincing at the time. But today, honestly, I think the Refuge has gained a reputation in France, which is such that really nobody, apart from extremists, you know, maybe religious groups or whatever, could go against the idea that these young people have been mistreated, ill-treated, and require special attention. So I think that that is something which is globally accepted today. And really, I think as well, perhaps the fact of having some media involvement and, you know, getting a certain number of people on board who have championed our cause has really helped to get it across. And again, I think all of that is good for advocacy. It's good for getting it out there, for talking about it. And really, I don't think we've had very many negative experiences in terms of public opinion in any case. During the period of the fight, the parliamentary fight for same-sex marriage, there was a lot of nasty stuff going on in France at the time, and obviously, you know, we were confronted with that as well. Homophobia is still rife today, and we're still having you know, violent incidents in the street. Of course, that's still continuing. But in terms of acceptation that the young people have been ill-treated and require help and care, no, I think that is become quite mainstream today.
There's a spirit of collaboration.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. A spirit of collaboration with all the social services in any case. Yeah. Mike? Is Mike there?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm afraid I'm sort of we're feeling the effect now of this power cut here. So I heard the answer, and but I sort of basically would have to guess what the question was.
The question was just, have you found any pushback from organizations that don't want to work on the topic?
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. I've just turned off the video so that it might help the sound quality.
It's actually much better.
That's
better. So we haven't really worked we haven't, you know, we're in a very different position than Claire is. But certainly, so what we found to date is this sort of surprise that it's necessary, and people saying, oh, well, of course we'll do it if people need that, but I never realized that was needed. It's that sort of.
Yeah, the audio has kind of cut out again, but I take the point that it's not that organizations are actively not working on the topic. It's just simply hasn't occurred to them or haven't realized there's a need for that type of work.
Yeah.
Robbie,
if you actually start doing it a bit further, I think that's when we'll, if there is going to be further resistance, but
Claire, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Robbie, just a point I wanted to make to bounce off Mike.
I'd be surprised to find that in Ireland at the moment.
Thanks, Mike. I think there might be a delay on the line.
I just wanted to add, Robbie, to what Mike was saying, that when he says, you know, people think that they know the subject already, that they're ready to answer the, you know, any questions on that. I mean, yes, we do it already, that kind of attitude. honestly, I think we have to be very, very humble, however open-minded we are, however much of a fantastic social worker we are. It's a very technical subject. It's very specific, and there's a certain amount of learning required, and all the more when we're talking about transphobia and trans identity. It's a subject that you know we need to learn about. Gender identity is not something that everybody knows about. So I think we have to be, all of us, we have to be humble enough to say that we require training, that we require knowledge, and that once we've got that, then we're much better equipped and armed to be a great listener to our young people. It's very important, that, I think.
Thank you. We have another maybe 2 or 3 questions that are coming in around staffing. And how important is it that you have LGBTIQ staff in services? Because obviously you can't have exclusively only LGBTIQ staff working with LGBTIQ young people. And I think it came up in Mike's presentation as well, that while as an organization, they haven't always been active on the topic, but when they started to work on it, the LGBTIQ staff had been saying for many years that we think this is a problem that we're seeing.
Mike, do you want to say anything? Maybe I'll just jump in there while Mike's getting his mic ready. I think, I mean, really, I don't think you have to be LGBTIQ to talk about LGBTIQ issues. But what I do believe strongly, very strongly, is that everybody requires training and everybody requires knowledge. And obviously somebody who's experienced a certain number of events themselves, or who has perhaps a deeper understanding of what it is to come out, is, has their own testimonial to bring to it. So I would say it's a great extra, it's an added extra, but you don't have to be LGBTIQ to be able to be a good listener or a good social worker to assist young people, young LGBTIQ persons.
Yeah.
I don't know. Mike, would you agree, or what do you think about that?
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me. I hope you can. Yes, would very much agree. I mean, you can't have a service which simply relies on the luck or the random chance of a person coming in, happening to come across a member of staff who is themselves LGBTQI. You have to have a system which everybody who's in the front line dealing with anybody is trained to do that. And I suspect it goes a bit beyond where our research is, but I think it would be a bit of an assumption to assume that every gay man or gay woman is necessarily fully au fait and understanding the issues that arise with trans issues, or necessarily that there isn't a few people who might be, the prejudice and so on in different sort of and misunderstandings in people from all different sort of backgrounds. So I think the training also needs to apply to people who themselves may be LGBTQ themselves. So I think it's a mistake to think it's just about your personal experience. It's quite clear, though, that the lived experience, we also know that lived experience of homelessness and lived experience of this sort of gender experiences can also be a positive. So you just don't want to rely on it, but still recognize its value.
Exactly. Totally agree with that. Yeah.
We also got a question about, we mentioned quite a bit the poor mental health outcomes for a lot of young LGBTI people, something that was mentioned in both presentations. Is there a higher percentage or disproportionate rise in drug use and substance addiction for LGBTIQ young people? Is that something, that's the questions after coming in, is that something that you've seen in your work?
Personally, at the Refuge, yes, there is abuse, and we've had young people who've lived in the street for a certain amount of time, and obviously there we've seen issues of addiction, prostitution, self-mutilation, etc. But I don't think, I don't have any hard facts to prove what I'm saying, but I think that it's perhaps not any greater than in kind of the young person's world as a whole. You know, I mean, young people tend to drink too much often when they're becoming of age, or maybe test out different kinds of substances, and we're seeing that as well. You know, that's something we're seeing as well. But I would say that really, when we're accompanying the young people on that side of things, we're accompanying young people as we would if they were non LGBTIQ. You know, we're dealing with the same issues of you know, I need to test these things out. I want to explore. I want to become an adult, and by doing this, I need to test out.
It's not because they're LGBTIQ that they drink, or they have an addiction problem.
I think the one, particularly those that have spent a certain amount of time in the street, you know, several months in the street, it is very much part and parcel of life in the street. And I think that in those situations, it could actually, they could be sort of pushed into it. And we've found that those that come to us maybe with a drinking, with an alcoholism problem, once they have a roof over their heads, they have the physical support, the mental support that they require, we can get rid of the addiction relatively quickly. So that, I would say, is probably, you know, the answer I would give to that question. Yes, if they've spent time in the street, but it can actually go quite fast when we take away the street conditions.
Mike, I don't know whether that was a topic that came up in the research.
Mike, we lost Mike.
Okay, we've lost Mike. We're just coming up on an hour now, so I do want to bring the webinar to an end, but there's just maybe two quick topics I'd like to address. Okay, Mike's left, so it's just the two of us, Claire. There are two topics that kind of come up a little bit. The first is this only a youth problem? And I think from our side in FEANTSA, you know, the work that we're doing is often labeled under the umbrella of LGBTIQ youth, but that's more so because it's a bit how Mike's mentioned at the very beginning of his presentation, that you can't talk about youth homelessness if you're not talking about LGBTIQ homelessness. And we've worked on youth homelessness for the last 4 or 5 years, and it was through that work that we began to realize, okay, there's a huge overrepresentation of LGBTIQ people within the homeless youth population, and it's from there that work has grown. And so it's not to say that you don't see LGBTIQ people of other ages experiencing homelessness, but we know from the research and evidence that there are disproportionately more LGBTIQ young people experiencing homelessness. And I guess coming back to a lot of the stuff that Claire mentioned and Mike mentioned, that there are more triggers when you're young because you don't have the supports in place, and the traditional structures you would rely on, the family, aren't there for you to connect with. And the last question maybe to put to Claire, it comes from Hugh in Wales, the End Youth Homelessness Wales coordinator, has asked the question about data collection, and it comes up everywhere that we just don't have enough data. And is there anything that we can be doing from a government side to improve the data collection systems? And maybe at that point, it's just interesting to say from our side of FEANTSA, we are organising trainings on LGBTIQ homelessness, and part of that training will look at how do you collect data, but it's not as a government, it's as an organisation. So your intake forms, your conversations, how do you go about collecting that data? But Claire, do you have any experience, you know, at a government level in collecting that data?
It's a real issue for all of us. It's a real big question, because we know that if we have the data, we will be able to be more influential. Advocacy will be easier, obviously, and there are definitely people that slip through the net. That's for sure. You know, it's really hard to. I think that in France, because, you know, 17 years of experience and a lot of we collect a lot of information because we work very closely with the social services. We're starting to really have quite a good database You know, we're really, the database is becoming better and better today. I don't think it's 100%, but I would say that we're getting stronger in that respect. And obviously the tools that we have today are helping us too, for this. So that, yeah, I think we're getting there. But that's really because we've been around for quite some time. And I think for somebody just starting out, it's a little more difficult, and it would really take a lot of, you know, a lot of kind of interconnecting to come up with the right information. So that, I would say, is absolutely vital and really needs to be set up. And just I'm thinking, Robbie, about the work that we are doing together at the European level as well, where things, you know, we're starting to impact the European Parliament and things on these questions, which is really important. The more, obviously, we can pool information from our different European countries, obviously the better it will be and the more impactful we're going to be. So yeah, there is a very real issue there on coming up with the data and pooling it and presenting it, and, you know, almost a kind of a LGBTIQ youth homeless observatory kind of situation.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's great to see that over the last maybe 2 or 3 years where we've really started to prioritize this as a topic. And maybe it goes back to the question earlier around positive and negative experiences. It's been overwhelmingly positive that people want to learn more and they want to do more on this topic. We're over time. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. As I promised, there will be a recording made available in the next week. I'll get the presentations from Sarah and Mike out. I want to say a special thanks to Mike for joining us despite the power outage he had moments before it started. I think he did a really good job in finding a way to connect. And a big thank you to Claire for joining us from the sunny south of France today. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.